Wildfires, heat waves, tropical cyclones, flooding, ocean acidification, droughts, rising sea levels, even oxygen depletion are just some of the side effects of global climate change. Executalks Media Production brings you this video courtesy of our sponsors, McKinstry, Rushing, and Seattle City Light. McKinstry's vision is to build a thriving planet by making every commercial building they touch more energy efficient. From new construction to implementing advanced energy systems, McKinstry is a national leader in designing, building, maintaining, and operating high-performance buildings. McKinstry is your trusted partner for the life of your building. Rushing is an engineering and sustainability consulting firm offering a full spectrum of integrated services, which includes mechanical, electrical, plumbing, energy analysis, lighting design, and commissioning. Powerful innovation is born when people bring unique stories, perspectives, and talents to the table. And of course, Seattle City Light. One of the largest public utilities in the United States, City Light has delivered carbon-free hydropower for more than 100 years. Seattle City Light's mission is to provide its customers affordable, reliable, and environmentally responsible energy services. Without the support of our sponsors, this video wouldn't have been possible. Thank you, McKinstry, Rushing, and Seattle City Light. I've been on a mission to get to the bottom of the climate change crisis. What causes climate change? What's happening in our state government to combat the effects of climate change? And what are we doing to stop the irreversible damage that our planet continues to experience? To learn more about the science behind what's causing climate change, I sat down with the Dean of the University of Washington's College of the Environment, Dennis Hartman. What causes climate change?
Well, climate change can happen for many reasons on different time scales. For example, the Earth's orbital parameters cause the ice ages in the past, and if you have a large volcanic eruption, it can cool the global climate for a few years.
Over the next several hundred years, the main contributor to climate change will be the emission of greenhouse gases that originate from the burning of fossil fuels.
We're going to be mostly concerned with the human impacts on the global climate, particularly the release of fossil fuels by humans, and especially carbon dioxide.
The greenhouse gas effect is primarily known to trap heat in the atmosphere. How does that work?
Okay, so the source of energy for the Earth is the sun. And the sun's radiation passes through the atmosphere relatively easily, as you can see today.
The sun gives energy to our Earth through solar radiation. That energy reaches the surface of the Earth and collects, but eventually needs to be emitted back to space. The Earth gets energy through solar radiation, but emits energy through infrared radiation. Here's where the problem with greenhouse gases comes in. Because infrared radiation is energy that travels through space as waves, along the way out, the energy gets absorbed by carbon dioxide molecules and other greenhouse gases that are hanging out in our atmosphere. Therefore, less energy is emitted to space and more energy is trapped in our atmosphere in the form of heat.
In order for that energy to return to space, it has to be emitted as infrared radiation because the Earth is much cooler than the sun. But the atmosphere is very opaque to infrared radiation. It doesn't go very far in the atmosphere because of the greenhouse gases. And because the temperature in the atmosphere decreases with altitude, as you increase the greenhouse gases, the level where that emission comes from that goes back to space goes higher in the atmosphere, and the surface temperature has to increase.
There was a report that was released by the United Nations that by 2100, which seems like a long time from now, but really isn't, global temperatures are going to rise by 7 degrees Fahrenheit. I know some people are thinking, 7 degrees, like what's the big deal? Like, it's not a big deal to me. What are the consequences of even a 7-degree increase in global temperature rises?
7-degree Fahrenheit warming of the air actually causes the water vapor holding capacity of the atmosphere to increase by 20%.
A global temperature increase of 7 degrees Fahrenheit increases the atmosphere's water holding capacity by 20%. That means that when it rains, it'll rain 20% harder because the atmosphere will be able to hold more water, causing more extreme floods. During droughts, it means that the atmosphere can suck 20% more water out of soil, causing longer and more extreme droughts.
Some people obviously feel that climate change is not real. What would you say to people who say, oh, climate change is not real, or it's a hoax, or how do you usually respond to somebody that says that?
So we know that the Earth is warming from many different lines of evidence. We have the instrumental record from thermometers measuring the air temperature, and that temperature has increased by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 200 years, most of it in the last 50 years. And other forms of evidence are the oceans are warming, sea ice is declining, bird migrations are changing. There's just many, many pieces of evidence indicating that the Earth is warming up. The other thing we know is that the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, particularly carbon dioxide, are increasing. And by using chemical information, we can know for certain that that increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is coming from fossil fuel burning by the isotopic abundance of the carbon and other forms of information. So we know that the Earth is warming, and we know that the greenhouse gases are increasing because of human activities. So using climate models, physical models, data from the ice ages, for example, we can determine from the laws of physics that those two things are connected. The Earth is warming because humans are releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
In Washington state, the effects could be rather dramatic. Climate change causes a decreased snow cover in the mountains, which then causes less cold water running in the ocean during the spring and summer, which would increase the river temperature and make it unlivable for salmon. We will likely see extreme heat in the summer, a sea level rise, and increasingly stronger storms headed our way.
There's a report that came out in 2019 that the Colorado River is going to lose about 20% of its water due to global warming. A lot of people's lives depend on this river. Are we going to run out of drinkable water? Is that kind of where we're headed?
Well, there's increasing shortages of fresh water in the western United States and around the world. Global warming is going to make our freshwater problem worse.
Do you think that, just on a state level, do you think that enough is being done in our state government to move towards clean energy?
Yeah, since nationally not enough is happening, I think it's very important for states and localities to take the steps necessary to move in the direction of cleaner energy. Things that the states do have an influence on national policy, and they can get a little bit ahead of the game by moving in that direction now before the nation and the world as a whole move more in the direction of renewable and carbon-free energy system.
On May 17, 2021, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee signed the Climate Commitment Act into law. This law appoints the Department of Ecology to develop a cap and invest program for facilities that emit over 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. This includes fuel suppliers like BP, Phillips 66, and Tesoro. It also includes large industrial facilities like Weyerhaeuser and Boeing. Each facility will have a cap to how much carbon they can emit, and each year that cap will decline gradually. If companies emit less than their cap, they can sell off carbon emission credits to other companies, so the companies have a financial incentive to reduce their carbon footprint. In 2018, Washington State emitted 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. The ultimate goal is by 2050, as a state, we emit no more than 5 million metric tons per year, a 95% decrease in less than 30 years. To find out more about what's being done politically in our state, I visited Senator Reuven Carlisle, the lead lawmaker and sponsor of the Climate Commitment Act.
Hey, welcome, Ashman. Great to see you. Fabulous. Welcome. Happy to have you. Okay. All right. Fabulous.
The state of Washington has embarked on just a historic approach to climate action. First, we're the only state in the nation with binding level commitments to science-based targets for 2050, with the policy framework to reach those targets.
Carbon emissions from personal trucks make up over 22% of emissions here in Washington State. What policies have been put in place specifically to help combat that?
One of the central pillars goes to the core of your question, which is, what is a decarbonization strategy for transportation? And I think in many ways, the evidence shows that a decarbonization plan is a clean fuel standard, and that elevates the decarbonization of transportation fuels. Fossil fuels are incredibly filthy, and we know that biofuels and moving toward biofuels of the next generation, whether those are renewable hydrogen, whether that's electrification of transportation, there's all kinds of approaches. So we see in the marketplace movement like the F-150 Ford pickup truck, but from a public policy point of view, we need the public infrastructure that makes both electrification possible and biofuels. Biofuels isn't just for trucks, but it's also for maritime and aviation and long-haul trucking. Every element of transportation, including our ferry system, is dependent upon the next generation of biofuels.
Carbon emissions in our state come from three main sectors. Transportation emissions like cars, trucks, buses, ferries, planes, and other methods of transportation make up about 45%. Heating needed for homes and commercial buildings make up 23%. And electricity makes up about 16%. During the past 2 years, the Washington State Legislature has introduced a whole suite of bills to combat climate change. The Clean Fuels Standard, a House bill that was passed in May of 2021, requires fuel suppliers to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels, cutting statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 4.3 million metric tons a year by 2038.
On the topic of the Clean Fuel Standard, it requires fuel suppliers to reduce carbon intensity over time. Is that right?
Correct.
Some skeptics say, what if the oil refineries simply choose to pay an extra tax but continue to maintain, the status quo and maintain polluting and just pay an extra tax?
Ultimately, the Clean Fuel Standard requires meaningful action, and it requires, in a market-based way, the production of high-quality biofuels. And we have to provide a policy framework for that to happen. And that policy framework of Clean Fuel Standard has been shown to allow for the decarbonization of transportation in a meaningful way in California, in Oregon, and British Columbia. So we've seen traction, we see the evidence, we see the data, and it's a meaningful policy that is having an impact. But we have to move forward with biofuel production, and that means facilities. That means the refineries have to be a partner at the table. And I think in many ways they're open to that. Some of them are more enthusiastic than others, but the marketplace is moving.
Biofuels are fuels that come from biomass, a variety of plant-based sources like corn, trees, wheat, and other various organic materials. Ethanol is a type of biofuel that makes up around 10% of most gasoline in the United States.
Many people are skeptical of biofuels for two main reasons. One, the cost is still higher than fossil fuels. And biofuel requires a lot more agricultural development, which may not be efficient. So what would you say to those who are skeptical about biofuel?
I don't think biofuels in any one category or sector is an answer. It is an element of a decarbonization plan. In California, there are biofuels that are 80% lower emissions than traditional fossil fuels and 20% lower in cost. So the marketplace is radically transforming by the day. We are seeing dramatic changes.
What's incentivizing oil companies to comply?
There's a handful of policies. The Clean Fuel Standard, the new cap and invest carbon pricing bill that we have passed also has a serious effect on the refineries. Look, I think it's intellectually important, but at the same time, sometimes uninteresting about whether or not an oil company is invested or not. The question is action on the ground. What is the carbon emissions in our state? And what do we need to do to decarbonize? What we need is refineries are part of it, and they need to be focused on their proportional role, and we need to migrate our system away from fossil fuels. Public policy is the issue. Clean Fuel Standard, cap and invest carbon pricing, and other major policies touch on transportation, buildings, natural gas. All of these systems are part of the ecosystem. So how do we grow our economy with a lower carbon footprint? And the answer is we decarbonize those highly polluting sectors. We help our large emitters, like the industrial sector, Alcoa, Kaiser, Weyerhaeuser, Boeing, all of those manufacturing facilities, to decarbonize their energy sector. We need a decarbonization plan for energy, which we have, electricity, transportation, which we have, and an economy-wide pricing mechanism that incentivizes the most economically efficient way to reach that 5 million metric tons.
The Washington Department of Transportation is a state agency working under the governor's direction to provide safe, reliable, and cost-effective transportation options. To find out more about how the public transportation sector is decarbonizing, I caught up with Washington Department of Transportation CEO Roger Millar.
We've been tackling air quality for over a quarter century. We engage a lot in water quality and the like. We address noise pollution. We address issues like salmon runs in streams that are impacted by our highways. So we're doing a lot to reduce the footprint, the admittedly substantial footprint of our transportation system.
The Washington Department of Transportation manages the largest ferry system in the United States and second largest ferry system in the world. The ferry system consumes a whopping 18 million gallons a year of diesel fuel, making it the largest source of carbon emissions in the state.
What are some measures being taken to reduce the carbon emissions of the ferry system in particular?
With the diesel boats themselves, we've gone from running pure diesel to running B10, and we're looking at B20 or biodiesel. We are in the process right now of converting our three biggest, gas hogs, if you will, and building an all-new boat that'll be diesel-electric hybrids. The Jumbo Mark II boats, they're 202-car, 2,500 passenger ferries. They run primarily on the Seattle to Bainbridge Island route and on the Edmonds-Kingston route. They burn on a substantial fraction of the diesel that we burn, which is a substantial fraction of the diesel the state burns. They're due for an engine overhaul where we rebuild or replace the four big diesel engines on the boats. And so what we're doing is during the overhaul, we're actually replacing two of the engines with banks of batteries. And the goal is to run the boats completely electric, charging them as they disembark passengers and embark new passengers, at the Seattle end of the trip.
Will they cost more? Like, did the electric
electric boats, there's a little bit of a price premium in that they're new. A new diesel boat is hundreds of millions of dollars, and a new diesel electric hybrid is not that much more in the overall scheme of things to build. They're a lot cheaper to operate. They're cleaner to operate, but they're also cheaper to operate. There are fewer moving parts, and we think those parts are going to last longer. So, decarbonizing transportation pays a huge greenhouse gas dividend, a huge climate change dividend, but it's also economically the right thing to do.
The department outlines their long-range plan in a document on their website. In order to effectively decarbonize the ferry system, there needs to be a way for the electric ferries to charge fast electrically. This chart shows how important it is for ferries to have access to shore charging. Without shore charging available, the department would not meet its 2030 or 2040 goals.
Obviously, the goal is to reduce ferry carbon emissions by 76%. Shore charging is a big part of that electrification plan. What are some steps happening right now on an operational level that's being done to make sure that the infrastructure is being built so that that's possible?
Well, we're working with electrical utilities on all of our routes on planning for the future. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the capacity to generate that power? Do we have the capacity to transmit that power? And how do we get it to the boat? Because the nature of what we do, when the boat comes in and offloads and loads, it's there for about 20 minutes. So you need to move a lot of energy in a short period of time. It's a real kind of a peak load, if you will, which means you basically have to have a substation there to make it happen. So we're working at Coleman Dock in downtown Seattle. We're working with Seattle City Light.
Is it technically possible to transmit that much power?
Yeah.
So it is possible.
So what we're looking at is a mechanical arm that would be under, they call it the pickle fork on the boat. If you're up on the front of the boat where the passengers get off, but right under that pickle fork, that piece of the structure, there'll be a mechanical arm that when it docks, it'll swing down and connect into a plug and charge while everybody gets off, while everybody gets back on, then we'll bring it back up and go on our way. But we feel we can move enough electricity to keep the boat charged doing that.
In order to decarbonize our transportation sector, we will become more and more dependent on electricity. As the demand for electricity grows, the infrastructure and energy sources for electricity become more and more important. In Washington state, our main energy source for electricity is hydropower, which is power that is generated from flowing water. About 84% of Seattle City Light's power mix comes from hydropower. In 2005, Seattle City Light became the first ever carbon-neutral electrical utility in the nation. To find out more about how the electric sector is decarbonizing, I visited Seattle City Hall and caught up with Seattle City Light's CEO, Deborah Smith.
Seattle City Light serves Seattle proper for electricity, and then we serve parts of a number of surrounding areas. So Shoreline, Burien, Tukwila, some are what we call franchise cities, and some are just surrounding areas.
Back in 2005, Seattle City Light became the first utility to be carbon neutral. For those that don't know, what does carbon neutral mean?
Every megawatt hour gets tracked in terms of where it comes from and where it goes. But when we go out and we make market purchases, sometimes we can't prove or track those purchases all the way back to their source. That's also true in the power that we purchase from the Bonneville Power Administration. So what we do is every year we assess how much of the electricity that we have used to serve our customers and to sell on the market, how much of that we can know for certain came from a green source and how much of it we can't. And so being carbon neutral, what that means is back in 2005, we started going out and investing in carbon offsets. So that's different than renewable energy credits. Carbon offsets mean we actually go out and find projects that we can invest in that deliver incremental sources of green carbon-free resource to the community. So we offset any power that we're not certain is carbon-free based on its source. We offset it through investments in certified projects that allow us to support the emerging industry.
Without hydroelectricity, would we be able to be carbon neutral, do you think?
I think we would have a very difficult time.
In 2019, the Clean Energy Transformation Act was signed and is now in effect. By 2030, at least 80% of the electricity used in Washington must come from clean energy sources, sources that do not emit greenhouse gases. By 2045, all electricity used in Washington must come from clean energy sources.
Now, obviously, you know about the Clean Energy Transformation Act that passed in 2019, requires large utilities like Seattle City Light and Puget Sound Energy to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is not a problem for Seattle City Light, and carbon free by 2045. What do you feel like it will take to be carbon free or greenhouse gas emission free by 2045 for utilities?
I think it's going to take some changes in technology and some changes in our tracking mechanism. We need, as a region, under CETA and under the various acts that are happening in other states, we need to be able to really effectively track that megawatt hour from its source of generation all the way through to where it is being utilized so that we can know for certain what the climate impacts and what the carbon greenhouse gas load of every megawatt hour of every megawatt that we bring into our system is. So that's kind of a technology piece.
So the technological barrier, do you think, is more of a barrier, or is it like organizational or people? I guess I'm trying to figure out what you feel like the main obstacle is for us to be carbon free.
For me, what I think is one of the major barriers, it's an educational thing. Again, people out there, and Ash, I'm going to say you, because I think you and I have talked about what age and what generation you are. And you know, one of the things that's really changed in our industry is people want what they want. And people want renewable resources. And people also want resources that are environmentally sensitive, that don't impact fish, that don't impact our habitat and our recreational opportunities. We will need to develop baseload resources that can replace what is currently a carbon-based resource. So, you know, there's lots of them that are on the horizon. We talk about hydrogen, we talk about renewable natural gas, we talk about synthetic natural gas. Most of them are in the development stage, so they are not commercially viable at a grid scale. But that will happen. And I think one of the things CETA will do is CETA and, again, the various legislation that has taken place in Washington State, but also across the West and growing across the country, is it incentivizes the development of those new resources.
Hydropower is generated from flowing water, but as climate change continues to have an impact on flowing water, electricity will need reliance on other clean sources. That challenge is yet to be solved.
What are some of the limitations of hydropower? Because it is a baseload resource. What are some of the limitations of it, and why isn't it 100%, I guess is my question.
As climate change comes along, and as climate change becomes more and more real, the generation that our hydro projects produce will decline. It is an interesting time, because if you think about that, water levels are lower, there's often less snow. The other thing that happens, spring is runoff season, right? The snow melts and there's water coming down the hills, and so what often happens is we're spilling water in the spring, which means we are actually moving the water around our turbine. We can't push all the water through the turbine, so we spill around the turbines. We have to manage that, because too much water can be harmful for fish. Not enough water can be harmful for fish. So you're operating these really large, sophisticated hydro projects, especially the ones that have storage capabilities. You're operating them within very narrow parameters. Because if you raise a level in a lake by more than a couple of inches, you can create issues on the shoreline. If you drop too quickly, you can strand fish. Hydro is great because it's a green resource, and we need the green resource because of climate change, but climate change is also impacting our species, which means we're driven to produce less hydro.
According to World Population Review, Seattle, Washington is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. As Western Washington continues to see population increase, the construction boom is likely to continue. Carbon emissions coming from commercial buildings is the fastest growing source of carbon emissions in our state. In 2019, the Clean Buildings Bill was passed by our state legislature in order to combat the effects that commercial buildings have on our climate. The law enforces a performance standard for any commercial building taking up more than 50,000 square feet and provides incentives for building owners to invest in energy efficiency improvements. To find out more about how the building sector is decarbonizing, I caught up with McKinstry's president, Ash Awad.
McKinstry actually works particularly in the commercial built environment. We serve clients that range from schools to universities, hospitals, commercial office buildings.
In 2019, our state legislature passed the Clean Buildings Bill, which requires building owners to think about their building energy differently, to address their building energy. How has this bill changed how you serve your customers?
I would just say that it helped kind of create a focus for our customers to pay attention to the topic of energy efficiency and decarbonizing their built environment. Our work is to actually help clients optimize their buildings and actually help them reduce energy and utility spend. We've had quite a focus on the climate crisis, so therefore in our space, decarbonizing the built environment is really critical. So when you actually have a bill passed, what it does is it actually then sends a message, and in this case sends a message and incentive. It's giving them clarity on what they need to do.
Ultimately, the building owners decide what energy investments they make, right, based on the bill. Like, it's up to them. Have there been any obstacles or challenges in convincing them, even though they have an incentive?
When we're actually having a conversation with a decision maker, a building owner, or their representatives, we want to make sure that they're well informed, not just with regard to the technical solution. We also have to put together a pretty significant investment grade financial case. Sometimes the points of tension around decision making come from, is the return on investment fast enough relative to replacing this component with something more efficient? In other words, if I'm an owner and I want something that has a 4-year payback on energy savings, I spend $100,000 and I want $25,000 a year of savings. If the project only saves $10,000 and it's going to take 10 years, but it's still a good project, that could be a point of decision making that then causes a client of ours to say, it's not quite a good enough financial return.
The main energy demand in homes and commercial buildings in Western Washington is heating. Heat in a building comes from large boilers that generate hot water, which then heats the air. Traditional boilers use natural gas or other fossil fuel sources to heat water.
So as you probably know, buildings account for 1/4 of the state's emissions, and it's the fastest growing source of carbon emissions. What's being done to stop the bleeding?
It shouldn't surprise anyone that the emissions coming out of the built environment are actually pretty significant and maybe on the rise here. So what are we going to do about that right now? Well, the first thing that we really have to do, is we've got to stop building buildings, particularly big commercial buildings, with any sources of fossil fuel for heating particularly. The technology is available today so that you don't need a hot water boiler fueled by natural gas to create heat or hot water in a building. You can actually do that using no carbon sources, including electricity and others. So we got to do that. We just got to stop deploying natural gas systems in commercial buildings, whether they be new or refit. If you're an owner of a building and you're going to have this asset for 5-10 years, even if you're going to flip it in 5 years, the value and the stranded asset nature of actually having fossil fuel in the building is going to become problematic for you.
And is the technology there now? Or?
Technology is there, of course.
Really?
Yeah, technology is there. Yeah, it's anything that looks and feels new is harder to adopt in any industry, but particularly our industry. All the stuff that would actually allow a building to be heated with non-fossil fuels is on shelf. The industry has such clever engineers and builders that there's so many good ways to kind of put these systems together. It's not just one option either. There's a variety of different options.
Do you feel like it would be a challenge for existing buildings because the infrastructure is built for natural gas and fossil fuels? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. You know, the reality is that, you know, if your infrastructure has already been built around a gas boiler, you know, gas goes in, fires, heats up water in a hot water boiler, hot water goes through the building. The question is, what are you going to do to replace that hot water boiler? Not impossible, very possible. We're working on many existing building projects where we're making them fossil free. We're actually taking all the fossil fuels out. It's very possible, very practical, interestingly enough, even cost effective. So all is good.
Yeah.
It's just the same as I said earlier, which is that it's a different type of challenge, but but we're up to it, and it's all on shelf. It's not like you're waiting for someone to invent something.
The technology to decarbonize the built environment exists. The technology to decarbonize our transportation system looks promising. Finding alternative energy sources to power our electric grid seems promising, but is still questionable. The questions, however, remain. How bad is our situation? How does the future of our state and our planet look? Will Washington State really be carbon-free by 2050?
You know that I have a home in Eugene, Oregon, and I love to spend time in Central Oregon. And I was actually just at a concert last weekend in Bend. And to get there, I go through the Mackenzie Valley. And last year, Labor Day weekend, I think we know that there were some horrific fires in Oregon. And I know people who lost their homes. But when I drive there right now, it looks otherworldly. The damage from the wildfires, the loss of what was an incredibly beautiful area, the impacts on drinking water for the city of Eugene, who gets all of their water from the Mackenzie River, those are very, very real. Big parts, big swathes of our country, of the beautiful Pacific Northwest, are charred and brown and dead. The Northwest, this just amazing place, Washington State, Oregon in particular, is gone.
I want you to imagine what happens when we actually get affected by rising sea levels. The damage to our cities and our places that we live start to actually affect us in a way that isn't just I guess I gotta not be in my house for 3 months, but you can never go back ever again. I mean, this is actually what we're facing. I'm just trying to be very clear that if we did nothing, the science is pretty clear, and we're seeing very specific evidence of what is going on right now with regard to extreme weather patterns. And then we did just experience a pandemic that really shut us down. So I just want everybody to kind of put all that together and think to themselves, if we did nothing, how horrible did we feel in 2020, and how horrible do you think the situation would be in 2050?
What does 2050 look like if we don't reach 1.5? Not a good picture. let's focus on reaching 1.5. We're taking a stand for our grandchildren's grandchildren.
Business comes to Washington State because young people come to Washington State, and young people come to Washington State for the amazing place that Washington State is. So business as usual, we're going to destroy that amazing place. And that would be a tragedy.
I'm optimistic in the sense that the solution is there in front of us. There are technological solutions, so I'm very optimistic that it's a doable problem. I'm pessimistic in the sense that we don't seem to be making enough progress. We know where we're heading, but we're not doing enough to avert that global warming future that we were just talking about.
If we achieve our goals, again, we're sustainable, we're resilient, we're economically competitive on a global scale, and we have the best quality of life of any place on the planet.
There's just no way that we're not going to face up to taking on this crisis. I get it. I get that there's a lot of resistance. I get that there's a lot of work. I get that, there's still folks that are deniers, and I got it. I got it. The generation that is you, and the generation just behind you, you care about this stuff. I'm not sure if you're smarter than us. I'm pretty certain you are, but I'm not willing to say that out loud openly. Oh, maybe I just did. Here's the point. You get the importance of these topics. You have access to information. You're actually willing to slow down and really understand the effects that are not just about you, but about those around you. There's no way that we're not going to face this crisis head on like we are, and that we're not going to have a much more positive outcome than we can ever imagine. I know that there's hard work. I know that we got to get everybody rallied up, but we're going to get there.
We are seeing in real time the profound implications of every aspect of climate change. And I think people feel it viscerally, morally, ethically. They feel it in their lives. They feel it in their pocketbook. Every aspect of life is being impacted in real time in front of us. And we can show up with grace and humility and intentionality to see it and feel it and act on it and pass legislation, pass bills, give a damn, show up in our civic lives. Or we can pretend like it's not real. I don't think that the latter is an option anymore. I don't think people feel that way.
Some people still feel like climate change is not real or whatever. What would you say to those people who don't believe in it?
I don't need to believe it today. I'm 60 years old, and if I'm lucky, my world will look very similar to the world I've lived in for these last 60 years. But my 5-year-old grandson, to your point, will he be able to fish? Will he be able to catch salmon? And even if I'm not convinced, am I willing to take that risk for him? It's not about us, it's about our kids and our grandkids.
Thank you for watching.